In Ecuador, the Constitutional Court appoints a new judge to present the proposal required by Parliament to move forward with the impeachment trial against President Lasso. In Mexico, authorities identified 28 of the 39 migrants killed in a camp in Juarez. President López Obrador lamented the incident. And in France, over 230 protests are expected nationwide on the 10th day of national demonstrations against the government's pension reform. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. We're going to begin in Ecuador. The Constitutional Court appointed on Tuesday a new judge to present the proposal required for Parliament to move forward with the impeachment trial against President Lasso. The decision came after the proposal submitted by Magistrate Teresa Núñez on Monday did not reach the minimum requirement of 6 votes among the 9 members of the court. Núñez's proposal aimed at rejecting the request to impeach the Ecuadorian head of state presented by legislators Viviana Veloz, Mireya Pazmiño, Pedro Zapata, and Rodrigo Fajardo. The newly appointed magistrate Richard Ortiz must present the case before next Thursday. In spite of the change, the court is expected to issue a decision this week on the request of the National Assembly that could accelerate the end of Lasso's government. In El Salvador, the exception regime decree against gang violence, which led to the imprisonment of over 60,000 criminals, completed its first year in force. After having been recurrently extended for several months, the exception regime reached 1 year with the aim of reducing the rate of violence in the Central American nation. Although President Nayib Bukele has described the results of the measure in social networks as positive, several social organizations in the country continue to denounce cases of death of detainees, human rights violations, arbitrary arrests, lack of due process, police harassment, and ill treatment. According to this, during the implementation of the measure, a total of 66,417 detainees, 4,304 released, and 5,802 alleged victims of human rights violations have been reported. "28 Guatemalans have been identified so far among the victims of Monday's fire at a migrant shelter in Ciudad Juarez, which left 39 dead and 29 injured. The Guatemalan Migration Institute has confirmed that 28 of the victims are from that country and has expressed its deep regrets for the fire and its solidarity with the victims. The Guatemalan agency said it will provide support and assistance to the victims' families and warned all its citizens that irregular migration carries with it a series of risks that have once again become evident. It also called on them to think it twice before embarking on a journey which often has no return or final destination. In this context, Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador gave details of the incident at his morning press briefing.
We have, so far, as a report, that 39 migrants lost their lives. They put mats at the door of the shelter and set them on fire as a protest, and did not imagine that it would cause this terrible tragedy. What we know so far is that it was mainly migrants from Central America and some from Venezuela who were in the shelter.
The UN Human Rights Office spokesperson Marta Hurtado expressed concern about possible arbitrary detentions and worrying prison conditions in El Salvador brought about the extended exception regime in the country.
The state of emergency in El Salvador, in force for a year, has allowed the authorities to adopt several measures that raise serious human rights concerns. We understand the serious problems posed by gang violence and the duty of the state to ensure security. However, the state has the duty to do so respecting international human rights law. In the last year, at least 65,000 people have been detained. Some of these mass arrests, including those of minors, may amount to arbitrary arrests, as they appear to be based on the appearance or social background of the detainees. Conditions in places of detention are also very worrying. We have received reports of serious violations of prisoners' rights, such as overcrowding, prolonged isolation, and the failure of chronically ill prisoners to receive prescribed medication. It is especially worrying that 90 people have allegedly died in custody since the state of emergency was declared. We remind the authorities that the right to life, the absolute prohibition of torture, the principles of a fair trial, including the presumption of innocence, as well as the procedural guarantees that protect these rights apply at all times, even during states declared emergency.
The Peruvian government announced on Monday that it will initiate a reform of the national police in response to the series of investigations against the security force for alleged cases of corruption. According to the President of the Council of Ministers, Alberto Tarola Peñaranda, the reform process will be in charge of the current Minister of the Interior, Vicente Romero. The Prime Minister indicated that the measure was ordered by the appointed President Dina Boluarte, and he pointed out that they will move forward with new recruitments and promotions within the security force, as well as with their fight against corruption. According to the high official, one of the first actions of the reform was the dismissal of the General Commander of the Peruvian National Police, Raúl Alfaro Alvarado, who is being investigated for leading an alleged espionage network. In this context, the Public Prosecutor's Office is investigating President Dina Boluarte and 7 ministers and former ministers of her government for allegedly committing several crimes of genocide, aggravated homicide, and serious injuries. Among other charges, the Peruvian officials are being investigated for the death that occurred during the social protests against the President and Congress of the Republic in southern regions such as Apurimac, La Libertad, Puno, Ayacucho, and Arequipa. On January 10th, the Public Prosecutor's Office informed that it would assume the investigation against Prime Minister Alberto Tarola, Defense Minister Jorge Chavez Cresta, former Prime Minister Pedro Angulo, as well as former Ministers Cesar Cervantes and Victor Rojas. Meanwhile, Minister Vicente Romero is charged for omission of functions due to the violent intervention of the National Police at the headquarters of the San Marcos University in Lima, where almost 200 people were arrested. On this issue, the lawyer from the Institute of Legal Defense in Peru, Carlos Rivera, gave his thoughts to local radio station Radio Programas del Perú.
Against Dina Boluarte, against Mr. Otarola, and the other ministers is a case that starts as a consequence of the denunciations that are presented in Ayacucho and Andahuaylas, and then in the case of Puno. These denunciations are transferred to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office opens an investigation of an investigative nature against the President of the Republic and against the Prime Minister or the people who occupy the positions of Prime Minister and the Ministers of Defense and Interior. And what was happening during those days were 2 very important things. One, a request for information from the National Prosecutor's Office or the Human Rights Office investigating in the 7 departments where acts of violence or crimes occurred, which may qualify as human rights violations, and then a request for information from the Joint Command of the Armed Forces, which has declared that it will not provide information because it considers that the operation plans are secret documents of national security.
Let's take a short break, but first remember you can follow us on TikTok at the account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back from the South. More than 230 protests take over France on Tuesday in the 10th day of national demonstrations called on by unions against the government's pension reform. Paris Republic Square is packed with demonstrators at the start of the mobilization against the unpopular reform. The bill that extends the retirement age to 64 years and increases the period of contribution was already forced through without a parliamentary vote last week. However, the unions and opposing political forces continue to strongly reject it, as they demand that President Emmanuel Macron withdraw the reform. In this sense, the General Secretary of Workers' Force, Frédéric Souillot, urged the executive to put an end to the political and social crisis, which is of concern given the episodes of violence of the last few days. For his part, Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin announced the unprecedented deployment of 13,000 police officers, 5,500 of them in the capital. Public transport, fuel supply, education and garbage collection in Paris are the sectors most affected by Tuesday's actions. The protest movement against the pension reform has turned into the biggest domestic crisis of Macron's second mandate, as hundreds of thousands continue to take to the streets all over the country. Aside from the massive concentration in downtown Paris, striking railway workers gather in front of the Gare de Lyon station to protest. Likewise, garbage collectors in the capital are continuing the strike, which has paralyzed the activity for weeks. Adding to the blockade, workers at an incineration plant just outside the capital city stopped work on Monday, and the Louvre, the world's most visited museum, closed its doors after employees blocked entry to the attraction. Furthermore, close to 16% of service stations in France are short of petrol because of refinery strikes. Central Confederation of Worker Union leader Philippe Martinez said in his regard that their aim is the withdrawal of the pensions law, although government representatives have stated it is no longer up for the discussion.
In view of the mobilization, which is not weakening, as we decided in the inter-union meeting, we proposed once again to the government, and especially to the President of the Republic, to suspend this project and to appoint a mediator. As in any social conflict in companies, when there is a conflict that lasts, we try to find a solution on subjects that are more topical than ever. Are those nerves work? The problem has been the same for 2 months, or even longer now. It's a government, or at least a president of the Republic now, who is, it seems to me, quite isolated, who decides in the place of millions of people that they have to work 2 years more. And when we talk to those who work, I was talking to a fireman this morning on a picket line, who said to me, "But can you imagine me at 64 years old on top of the ladder to save lives? If I'm not in a condition to do my job properly, lives are at stake."
Likewise, the candidate for the leadership of the General Confederation of Labour, Marie Bouisson, said the government must listen to what is happening in the country.
Now the ball is not in our court, it's in the government's court. It has to listen to what is happening in the country. It must listen to the anger that is rising and stop sending its forces of order to beat us. Listen to what is happening and withdraw the reform project.
In Portugal, a man stabbed 2 women to death at an Ismaili Muslim center in the city on Tuesday. The aggressor was then shot down by the police. Ismaili community leader Narzim Ahmad told local reporters that the women were Portuguese staff members at the center. According to an official report, several other people were wounded, but no further details have been provided. Portuguese Prime Minister Antonio Costa said everything points to this being an isolated incident. The Shia Imami Ismaili Muslims, generally known as the Ismailis, belong to the Shia branch of Islam, and they are a culturally diverse community living in more than 25 countries around the world. Portugal hasn't recorded any significant terror attacks in recent decades, and religious violence is virtually unheard of. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova on Tuesday drew attention to Washington's position in avoiding an investigation into the sabotage of the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The official considered that if the truth were to emerge, it would harm the United States and all its accomplices, which would cause them direct damage. For his part, presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov regretted the decision taken by the UN Security Council, which on Monday did not support a Russian-Chinese resolution proposing to organize an international investigation into the sabotage of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines, with only 3 countries, Russia, China and Brazil, backing the document and 12 countries abstaining. Spanish firefighters continue to battle the first major wildfire of 2023 in the eastern part of the country. The blaze has already ravaged more than 4,000 hectares, mainly forests, and forced more than 1,000 from their homes. Over 500 firefighters battled the fire, which broke out near the eastern village of Villanueva de Viver, where unseasonably warm temperatures near 30 degrees Celsius on Friday. In addition, strong winds also encouraged the flames of the blaze, complicating work for firefighters who were backed by 23 water-dropping planes and helicopters. According to the European Forest Fire Information System, in 2022, Spain was the continent's worst-hit country, with nearly 500 places destroyed, more than 300,000 hectares. The offspring of Indonesia's famous Krakatoa volcano erupted 4 times on Tuesday, sending a huge column of volcanic smoke over 1,000 meters above its crater. According to officials at the Center of Volcanology and Geological Hazard Mitigation, Mount Anak Krakatoa, which means shadow of Krakatoa, the latest event is part of an eruption phase associated with the formation of a new body for the volcano. In 2018, its crater partly collapsed when major eruptions sent huge chunks of the volcano sliding into the ocean, triggering a tsunami that killed more than 400 people and injured thousands. Anak Krakatoa, which sits in a strait that separates the islands of Java and Sumatra, has been sporadically active since it emerged from the sea at the beginning of last century in the caldera form after the 1883 eruption of Mount Krakatoa. teleSUR English continues to grow. You can now tune in from 33 different African countries through StarSat. Dial 461 and enjoy Latin American alternative broadcasts. One final short break and we'll be right back. Don't go away. Welcome back from the South. At a press briefing on Tuesday, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning hit back at the criticism of increasing loans to Belt and Road countries, saying the Asian giant has never attached any political conditions to loan agreements.
On the debt issue, who is a sincere and reliable friend of developing countries and who is a rumor maker with ulterior motives? The majority of developing countries have first-hand experience, and people of insight in the international community can see clearly. China has always carried out investment and financing cooperation with developing countries based on the principle of openness and transparency. China acts in accordance with market laws and international rules, respects the will of relevant countries, has never forced any party to borrow money, has never forced any country to pay, will not attach any political conditions to loan agreements, and does not seek any political self-interest.
In Israel, protesters vow to continue demonstrations until Prime Minister's judicial reform is withdrawn. On Monday night, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced a pause in the progress of his polemic reforms in order to allow dialogue in the face of popular pressure which affected his own coalition. The proposed reform would allow for greater government intervention in the judiciary selection while depriving the Supreme Court of the power to declare the unconstitutionality of laws, which sparked strong rejection in various sectors of civil society. In this regard, on Tuesday morning, Israeli President Isaac Herzog requested the government and the opposition to immediately start negotiations to reach an agreement on the proposal. On Tuesday, Israeli forces killed another Palestinian youngster in the northern West Bank city of Nablus. According to the health ministry, the victim was identified as Amir Mohammad Lola. In the same operation, 20 Palestinians were wounded and 11 others were also killed. Nablus and the nearby city of Jenin are considered militia strongholds and therefore systematic targets of Tel Aviv armed forces and police operations. With the death of Lula, a total of 87 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli army since the beginning of the year, including 17 minors and 1 woman. In Saudi Arabia, 20 people were killed and 29 injured on Monday in a bus accident in the town of Aqabat Shir in the southwestern Saudi region of Asir. Preliminary information indicates that the vehicle's brakes failed as it was heading towards the holy city of Mecca, causing it to hit a bridge and overturn after the impact. The vehicle caught fire and was completely destroyed, according to the report. The people injured were transferred to Asir Central Hospital and a hospital in Aba. The Lasso tragedy recorded in the Arab country occurred in 2019 when at least 35 Arab nation nationals were killed in a bus collision in the Medina area. We have come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For Telesur English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.